All right, before we get into this very important episode, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Cardio Miracle. This is the best supplement that I've ever taken. I take it every day, 3 times a day. It has helped with several ailments that I've had for the majority of my life. And when I say help, I mean actual lab tests that make a very scientific difference in some very important vital numbers. Go to cwicmedia.com, cwicmedia.com, scroll down to the bottom of the homepage, and there you will find a short video of me describing the impacts that this great supplement has had on my health. Now, in 2007, America had 1 gender clinic. 1. How many are there today? Well over 300 gender clinics. The episode that you will be hearing today is about some Latter-day Saint parents and their adolescent daughter, who is recently coming out as non-binary or transgender. This is unfortunately something that has not been talked about much within the church, not publicly, unless, of course, you've heard it on the other side where there has been support for what has obviously been shown as a social contagion among adolescent girls. Now, that doesn't mean that gender dysphoria is not a real thing. It is, and it's probably always existed. But it's always existed in a very small population, about 0.01% of the population. And the overwhelming majority of those are boys, young boys. And it usually manifests somewhere about ages 2 to 4 years old. And most of those boys, if it is allowed to play out, end up being gay men, not transgender or trans women. But that's before the craze and the hyper media attention to identitarianism and transgenderism. Before 2007, there was no extant scientific literature on teenage girls with gender dysphoria. There was no need for it. Now, the number one demographic of those that come out and profess to be non-binary or transgender is teenage girls, with the numbers of 20-something-year-old females growing rapidly as well. In 2018, the UK reported a 4,400% rise over the previous decade in teenage girls seeking gender treatments to transition. In Canada, Sweden, Finland, and the UK, clinicians and gender therapists began reporting a sudden and dramatic shift in the demographics of those presenting with gender dysphoria, from predominantly preschool-aged boys to predominantly adolescent girls. That comes from the book by Abigail Schreier, Irreversible Damage. In addition, Dr. Lisa Littman of Brown University, in her research of this bizarre phenomena, found that there were 2 patterns that stood out. First, the clear majority, 65%, of the adolescent girls who had discovered transgender identity in adolescence, out of the blue, had done so after a period of prolonged social media immersion. Second, the prevalence of transgender identification within some of the girls' friend groups was more than 70 times the expected rate. So for those who might say, well, there's been social pressure in the past where many of these girls would not have been able to come out, that does not explain how these girls seem to change and go along with this phenomena, this social phenomena, within friend groups. The numbers are astronomical within these clusters. This is a social virus, a contagion. Dr. Littman has coined this as rapid onset gender dysphoria. As we always do in this podcast, our aim is to bring awareness. I've had numerous messages from parents who are going through something very similar. I hope you listen to this entire episode with Ben and Tami Wright and what they have gone through. For some of you, it will resonate and be all too close to something you have experienced. For others, it's a warning. All right, welcome to Cwic Show. My name is Greg Mattson, and I am your host. In this episode, we have Ben and Tami Wright. They are Latter-day Saint parents of a transgender child. This is a story that you really need to listen to. Hopefully you can get through this episode, this entire episode, to understand what many parents inside and outside of the church are currently going through. There are so many dynamics to the story of a non-binary or a transgender child within a family. And I want to cover this because many of you have gone through this. Some of you will go through this. And I think it's important for you to hear from parents that have already gone through this. Ben and Tami, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, Greg. We appreciate this opportunity.
So let's go back to the beginning on this. You've got a daughter that is now identifying as non-binary or transgender. Can we go back to the very beginning on this and talk about her a little bit as a child? And, was she manifesting anything that would have been non-binary or transgender when she was young? And then where did this change start to happen?
Well, speaking as her mother, the feminine influence in the family, as she was growing up, there was never any sort of indicator whatsoever that she had any sort of gender dysphoria or confusion. She was very precocious. She was very free. She was a very fun-loving, just go-getter type of little girl. And she loved Barbies and dresses and dressing up. And we had a chest full of Disney princess dresses that she and her 2 year younger than her sister would play together with, like, for hours on end and be entertained. She had stuffed animals up to the roof practically. She loved them. She was very intelligent and also very social for, the potential of being on the spectrum. And so we just decided to just kind of sidestep that unless it became an obstacle to her learning and to her development.
Yeah, but we still have pictures of her when we went to Disneyland when she was probably about 5 or 6 years old. And she had on her princess dress and she was out there dancing with all the other kids. And she loved being with the princesses. And she was very, very feminine.
I think you had mentioned the fact that something had happened behind the scenes before you knew about it. And then you started to see maybe some behavioral changes.
It all kind of started when I felt like I needed to let her and her younger sister, just younger than her, know about me. I experienced same gender attraction. Our daughter has always had an affinity for wanting to find something in common with people and share that experience with them. She's very empathetic. And so I decided to share with my 2 oldest, and they were 14 and 12 at the time, my experience with same gender attraction that I've experienced since I was 2, 3, 4 years old, in my earliest memories. And it was a time of discovery for me where I was coming to a place of acceptance of that part of myself where I felt like God had, for whatever reason, given me this challenge. And I had felt from personal revelation that it was actually a gift that he was using to tutor me, so to speak, through life and giving me a greater opportunity to draw myself closer to him. And in the process of receiving that personal revelation, I felt him prompt me to share with our 2 oldest my experience. And I noticed right away, our oldest, I could tell it completely caught her off guard. First off, neither of them had any idea whatsoever. And Ben and I had discussed it prior, and we were both on the same page with this. And then I noticed that our oldest started kind of looking more into LGBTQ things in general. Just
how old was she?
She was 14 years old. So she started asking me questions. And we were very careful with the internet access that we gave our girls, because we didn't want them to get confused about this particular subject, because there's so many voices, and we felt like we wanted to be the ones who were the voice that was influencing them in this regard, because I felt like I knew that God loved me and that he wanted me to stay on the covenant path. And I felt like if I shared my experience with my girls, it might be a testimony builder for them, to help them to feel that if we are given hard challenges, God will help us through it. And so, but then I started noticing, and Ben started noticing this as well, that she started doing all sorts of underhanded things to try to get access to the internet. She would consistently hack the passcode on my phone and then get my phone and start getting on the internet.
She would actually turn off the screen downtime. So basically, when you're using, when you're not, screensaver. So the screensaver would never turn on, and so she could pick it up if we weren't looking at it.
Yeah, and so, and then just other things. We had an Xbox. We discovered that they knew that, the Xbox should not be used at night and not on weeknights. And then we discovered she and her sister were staying up all night playing on the Xbox, and all sorts of different things that we had never encountered with either of them before. And our oldest had always been very respectful of our home rules, and this attraction to the internet got stronger and stronger. And in the fall of 2019, she started high school. She was 15 by then. And she was having a hard experience at the private school that she was at. And we decided that we were going to take her out of that school and put her in public high school. And that's when things really went down the toilet, because she had access to the internet, unfettered access, more or less. She had to have it in order to do her homework. And because everything was online, even prior to COVID with public school. So we had to get her a Chromebook or an iPad. I can't remember what she had at that point, but we had to get her a device so she could have access to the internet to get on Google Classroom. And then we tried to set up filters and a network router to filter out stuff. But she would come to us and say, "Oh, Mom, I can't do my homework because this website is blocked. I need to have access to YouTube." Well, I would verify and I would check. And she did. She needed to have access to YouTube for a lot of her assignments. But then she started to watch a lot of anime. And she started watching a lot of anime on Netflix. And the anime just got darker and darker and darker. And then she started talking to me about Tumblr, and I didn't know anything about Tumblr. Mm-hmm. I just thought it was this microblogging site. I'm a software engineer, but I've always shied away from gaming, game theory, and those types of things because I didn't like the addictive nature of it. So I stayed away from those things as a software engineer. And so I didn't know a lot about what happened on these alternative social media platforms like Tumblr. But then her behavior, just everything about her demeanor, she kept asking to get her hair cut. She just was becoming more resistant and defiant. She was becoming more depressed. There was just so many parts of her behavior that were really alarming to me. And I kept telling Ben, I'm like, something is seriously wrong. I can just feel it in my bones. This is my child. And as her mom, something is not right. But we couldn't put our finger on it. And she wasn't showing us much other than talking about Tumblr and that she loves to write. She's very creative. She loves art. She loves drawing. She started getting into drawing her own anime and sharing her anime on Tumblr. She started sharing her creative writing. She did a lot of fan fiction kind of things. She just was showing all these things that were very based in the internet. Like her whole life became the internet. She started hyperfixating on a YouTube star. What's his name?
Markiplier.
Markiplier.
Yeah.
And Markiplier and his buddy created this 1 year long show called Unis Honest. And it was very dark. There was a lot of, talk about death, because at the end of the show, the show would end and there would be nothing left. They would scrub the whole internet of the show, and that would be like death. And so there was just this fixation on death. She started getting into creepypasta, which is another YouTube, which is about like Slenderman. And I don't know if you know anything about Slenderman, but he's this dark, tall character that goes in and steals young teen girls from their bedrooms, and they just disappear. And she became completely fixated on this. And then she had a friend in her ward who they were really close to. But after a while, I started to notice that this friend's parents wouldn't allow her to come and hang out with our daughter. And so I started wondering about that. And then our daughter said to me, well, my friend says that she's non-binary. And I was like, what is non-binary? I have no idea what that is. And she said, well, she's neither male or female. And I said, you understand that that is not a biological possibility, right? And she said, yeah, I know, Mom. I knew you would say that.
But yeah, she developed this friendship with the friend in the ward. And, she's a great family, wonderful people. They would come over all the time. Then all of a sudden they stopped coming by quite as much, and they didn't really say much. But then that's when we heard about the non-binary. And unbeknownst to us, apparently she and this friend of hers discovered a book. It was called This Book is Gay. And so we didn't know anything about this at the time, but apparently when we used to take the kids to Barnes and Noble, and they could pick out a book, and we just have a fun time there. But while we were there, she actually shoplifted the book, and she took it home and she started reading it. And so we didn't find out about this until years later. It was just recently we found out about this. And in the book, it actually goes through and it talks about what the non-binary ideology is, what transgender ideology is. It talks about kind of how to confront your parents and other people who question your non-binary.
It talks about sexuality. It goes into details about sexual acts.
It's basically a sex education for somebody who is non-binary.
What did it say about the parents?
Basically that if they don't agree with you, then they don't accept you, and
they're transphobic.
They're transphobic, right? Really steps in between the parent-child relationship and creates a separation there.
So she was kind of introduced to this by this friend in the ward.
Yeah.
Okay. And so she reads the book, she learns more. Does she now follow through with this and by studying more on the internet?
Yeah.
Yeah. We found out later, after several years, probably two or three years later after she started doing it, that, my concerns were with this dark art, anime stuff that she was drawn to. But that was just the surface. Like, we had no idea that simultaneously she's on Tumblr getting all sorts of, like, inundated with all sorts of messages about queer theory.
Yeah, Tumblr is a fountain of queer theory. It is. I don't know if parents understand this or know this, but a lot of people believe that's actually where it comes from, and that they used to. That Tumblr is kind of the app that launched queer theory before it even went out into the academy.
Right.
Yeah. And so on there, she would see influencers, and they talk about hormones. They talk about transitioning. They talk about how wonderful it is. And it basically created this group of people where she could kind of feel welcome and feel a part of that. And, she did struggle a little bit at school with friends, and we just moved to Nevada from Ohio at this point. She lost some of her friends. And so I think she was in a little bit more of a vulnerable position there as well, which made this whole ideology more enticing because now she had a place where she could belong.
We were going through the cycle of, here's your iPhone. Nope, give us your iPhone. Here's your iPhone. Give us your iPhone. Because we would discover different things she was doing on it that she, were explicitly against the rules. And turns out that the same thing was happening with her friend's parents and her friend. I would say, have you heard from your friend lately? And she's like, no, her parents have taken her phone away, her iPhone away. And I said, well, does she have another phone? And you can just text. And this is when we started getting into Gab phones, because we were like, yeah, we cannot have an iPhone or a smartphone for this child. Mm-hmm. And and she'd say, well, she can text, but that's not how we communicate, Mom. In our friendship groups, we need iMessaging, we need Snapchat, and all these things. So she made it seem like if she didn't have her iPhone, she was like a social outcast. And there was some of that to it, because everyone at this private school had iPhones. But for whatever reason, our daughter did not know how to have any sort of self-control. And now we know a lot of that had to do with this ideology that she was getting filled with in her mind.
She gets inundated with the ideology online with a friend. Does she then come to you one day and say, I am non-binary, and this is what opens the gate? Or do you discover other things? How does this happen?
So I felt prompted. She was acting very different, as we've already been describing. So I felt prompted to come to her and say, I feel like there's something on your mind, like a secret, but that you want to talk to me about it. And she said, yeah, actually there is, Mom. And I said, well, what's going on? And she said, well, I think I'm gay. And I said, oh, okay. Well, do you want to talk about it? I understand what that's like. And you don't need to be alarmed by it. God loves you. You're his child. And there's still a place for you in the church. And, let's work through this together. And she said, I'm okay. I don't need to talk about, God as far as this subject goes. And I said, okay. But, that was the first indicator to me that she was starting to lose her faith. Not only was she, being swept up in this ideology and starting to identify with it, but she was starting to lose her testimony. And it had me very worried. And I just kept trying to reach out to her in whatever way I could to talk to her about God, to talk to her about what it means to have same gender attraction and be a child of God, and that there is a way forward and she can still have all the blessings of the gospel if she pushes forward on the covenant path. She can still have an amazing husband someday, like her dad is to me, and she can have a family. None of those things really resonated with her. I could tell it was just kind of like lancing off of her, spiritually speaking. Then we went to, because of her coming out to me, we decided that we would take her to a faith, religious affiliated, LDS affiliated, LGBTQ supporting group, organization. And we decided we would take her with us to their conference. And I had been to the conference twice, and Ben had been with me once. And we thought, okay, this is going to be great. We're going to bring our child here, and it's going to be like EFY for LGBTQ youth. And they're going to encourage them, bear their testimonies, and encourage them to stay on the covenant path. And this is going to be where she finds her niche, she finds her niche spiritually.
And this is the motto of the group, is to help the people on the spectrum live their covenants. And so that's why we went, is we wanted to have some help and direction there, not only for us to walk that pathway, but for our daughter.
Yeah.
And was this a positive experience?
No, it did not turn out right. So Ben and I were in our workshops and we actually taught a workshop that year together. And we were going to art classes and they had a separate youth track. We came together as parents and youth for the very first meeting, which was the night before the conference officially started. It was at a dinner. And then the rest of the conference, we had no idea what was going on until the second day of the conference, which the conference is a Friday and Saturday. And then on Sunday, they have like a testimony meeting. So the second day of the conference, we were told that that there was a special parent and child or youth workshop that they wanted the parents to come to. And so Ben had an obligation with a different class. I don't remember. It might have been like suicide prevention or something. As a physician, we felt like that was really important for him to participate in that. And the gay community loves my husband. They just think he's amazing because he is. And so, he felt like he wanted to be supportive of the gay men and participate in this. And so then I went to this parent-child youth workshop. Well, so we come in, the parents all come into the workshop and sit down. And there's a therapist that's moderating it. And the youth are sitting there already waiting for us. We sit by our respective children. And then she says, okay, I'd like to excuse the youth, but before I have them go, I'd like to reassure them that I'm going to talk to their parents about what their parents can do to meet their child's needs and to help them feel accepted. And so I was kind of like, something didn't strike me right about that statement, and felt like we were kind of getting set up. So then the kids all get up and leave. And then the therapist proceeds to tell us that she has heard our children. She knows their hearts. She understands them. And that many of us have been failing our kids, our LGBTQ youth. And I even hate to use the acronym because really they're just children of God. I looked around the room at the other parents. There was a mom in opposite corner from me who was just weeping. She was just devastated. And all the parents are looking at each other. And I'm thinking to myself, how does she know my child when she's probably spent an hour, maybe 2 hours with my child? How does she know my child better than me? How does she know my child's heart better than I do? I've raised this human being for almost 16 years. How dare she say that? But I was just so like caught off guard by it that I think most of the parents there, we were just kind of like deer in the headlights, look like, what do we do? I guess we have no other option. We need to listen to this person who is supposedly an expert, a family therapist and an expert in this field, because she's telling us we're failing our kids. Many of them are on the verge of suicide because of us. And so I'm going to cry. I just had to sit there and listen to what she had to say because I didn't understand what was going on and how she could say that. And so she proceeds to go around to each parent and she's like, who is your child? And each parent says the name of their child. And she says, your child needs you. And then she would list everything that particular youth had said that they wanted. The demands were crazy. Some of the kids were like, I need to have gender reassignment surgery tomorrow. And others were like, I need hormones. It was so crazy. Luckily, she came to me and she said, your child says to me that she doesn't believe that you really love her. Now, that's luckily for me. That was like devastating to hear, but at least I wasn't being told that my child was about to commit suicide because she's not getting hormones. And so She said that to me, and I wanted to just fall on the floor. And so then she has all the kids come back in, and then she has one of the transgender role models of this particular organization enter, like a rock star, come into the room. And there's all the kids are like, and they're like hanging on every word that this person is saying. As this person shares their journey of becoming a transgender woman and how she knows that God made her, her spirit is female. Something happened to her body when she was in the womb. She's always known that she's female since she was very small, and just goes on and on. So she's basically grooming our children. And this therapist set it up to allow this to happen because us parents were so gaslighted. We had no idea what to say or do. I think every single one of us were paralyzed in that room.
So no one said anything at that time?
No.
Well, I think this idea was just so new as well. Like none of us had really ever heard about the non-binary until recently. And so we're kind of grappling with the idea, what is this? And so we had seen other transgender people who they were, having dysphoria ever since they were young. I mean, 2-3 years old, they were already feeling like they needed to be in a different body, but that's not what we were experiencing. That's not what our daughter had gone through. So how does this match up? Like, how is this similar to the traditional transgenderism?
And it did not match up, but these kids wanted to be just like this person that was speaking to them, this transgender person. And so, I mean, you could just see it. They were just starstruck by her. And I don't want to speak ill of this person because she's actually a good friend of mine. But I didn't know what to do. And so I told Ben about it. I mentioned it to him briefly afterward. We never got actually a chance to debrief about it because we had a lot of other things going on while we were there at the conference. And then shortly thereafter, I would say within a month or two, our daughter came out to me as non-binary.
And what did that mean to you at that time? What does that mean, non-binary? What was she saying?
So I said, I don't understand what this means. And she said, Mom, gender is a social construct. And I said, It's not. I mean, I gave birth to your little body. I saw what came out of my body, and I can tell you, you are 100% girl. And she was like, Mom, that is not how you handle this situation. That is a transphobic thing to say. And I said, but what else am I supposed to say? Because I know that gender is something that comes from God. And I know that you have always been a girl. You may not have felt always like you fit in with the other little girls, which I totally get because when I was growing up, I often felt the same way. But just because you feel different than them doesn't make you some sort of nothing gender, a nothing burger gender. I hate to say that, but that's kind of like whatever. Like everything about her is getting erased by subscribing to this non-gender identity.
Yeah, she basically would go back in her childhood and she would think about, oh yeah, I used to like this that was more like a boy, or I used to like that. And she would forget about the times when she would wear the dress and she would be happy to see the princesses at Disneyland, and kind of really rewrote her entire history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And she used to have such an amazing memory. Like she growing up, she had basically a photographic memory. We would say probably she was like a savant in some ways. And then suddenly she to this day, for like the last 3 or 4 years since this all really came to a head, she cannot remember her childhood. She can't remember anything good about it.
So she's blocked it out?
Yeah.
Yeah. She plucked out the good parts. She remembers the parts that support what she wants to be now.
You've got to be thinking, okay, how do I handle this? What does this mean going forward? I'm guessing because along with this ideology, especially if you're a teenager or even early 20s, a lot of this ideology includes a pushback on parents, right? I mean, it's everywhere. It's part of the activism of queer ideology is it's going to push back on the parents. So this becomes a very difficult thing to manage, I'm guessing. I mean, this is your girl, your daughter, you love her. Something is drastically wrong here and changing very quickly. What do you do to manage this?
Yeah. I mean, she basically was a different person now. Like our daughter was essentially gone.
She was stolen.
And, she no longer felt tied to us in the family. She didn't feel tied to her religion. So we started digging into this a little bit more. We started reading books, and we found a great book that explained this phenomenon. Somebody had been tracking this for several years. The book is called Irreversible Damage. And so these people had noticed that
by Abigail Shrier, correct?
Abigail Shrier, yeah. Mm-hmm. So they'd noticed that other girls across the country were experiencing this, and that there had been a dramatic rise in transgender kids just over the past decade. And
in girls.
Right?
4,000% increase.
And it wasn't from when they were young, it was more in teenage girls.
Rapid onset.
A rapid onset, right. And so this seemed to be more of a social contagion is what we are now realizing. And so we brought this up with our daughter. We said, hey, we read this book. There's other girls around the country who are experiencing the same thing. And we're very concerned about you because we feel like you're getting sucked up in this ideology, and this is really going to be harmful for you. And, that's just really set off a lot of fireworks to confront her directly about it. She didn't want to hear it. And she thought that we were really bigoted and that we didn't know her. We didn't love her. We weren't accepting of her.
She actually stole the book, so we couldn't find it. It was on my nightstand. She stole it off the nightstand and hid it so that we couldn't read it.
But you couldn't read it. So, I mean, I've listened to Abigail Shrier speak many times. I've read a little bit of the book. She pulls a lot from a professor and a researcher from Brown University, Dr. Lisa Littman, who coined the phrase rapid onset gender dysphoria. And it's very different from what we would have traditionally looked at with transgenderism, right? Transgenderism is overwhelmingly something that you see very early on with little boys. It's overwhelmingly boys that feel like they're a girl. And in most cases, I think the number was 70%, what they end up, if they just let it go, what they end up finding out is, okay, good chance the boy is gay, right? He's a gay man. He'll be a gay man. I think the number I pulled from there was actually 4,400% increase on teenage girls that has happened. It's unreal. I mean, the numbers are astounding that move, outside of a traditional binary identification. And so you can't help but look at, there's no other reasonable explanation for this other than a social contagion for this, that this is something that is avoidable, right? It's something that, but something that you have to put out a trumpet of warning to families, to parents, that they can understand that this has kindled, across the West very strongly with these young girls, and that social media and the internet have been the spawn of all of this. 100%. They get brought into these groups. The parents don't usually know what's going on, sometimes for a year, 2, 3 years after they've already been involved with it. And so they've been absorbed into this ideology that is an ideology, right? It is an ideology that affects young women for whatever reason, much more than it does young men. And this is basically, as you're saying, what happened with your daughter.
Yeah. By the book.
That's exactly it.
Literally by the book. This book describes exactly what happened to our daughter. Yeah. Like her journey, almost step by step.
Yeah.
Okay. So you've gone through this now. You see what's happened. Where are things now? I mean, how have things evolved since she came out to you?
This is not my child. It's still not my child. we're starting to see glimpses of her coming back. Little like tender blades of grass coming through the permafrost. But she has been destroyed. Her mental health has been destroyed. Her grades went from straight A's. When we moved here to Georgia in 2020, her grades were over a 4.0. She went from that to barely graduating with a 3.0. But most of her grades in her last 2 years of high school were C's and D's and F's.
She's had a great challenge of focusing on her schoolwork and staying on task. It's really affected her greatly.
Mentally.
So, yeah, mentally, it's taken a great toll on her.
We're not sure if she's taking hormones, if she somehow managed. She's very, very sneaky, and she had learned how to get things off the internet without telling us, buying things. And so, we've recently learned that taking testosterone for these non-binary transgender girls who are biological females has an immediate positive effect, but it's very short-lived, and then it can cause increases in depression, in aggression, violent behavior. And we have yet to uncover if this has been going on with her, but we're at this point just trying to repair whatever connection we have with her.
One of the things that I did sit down and talk to her about when we had more of a calm moment, I asked her about her intentions to take hormones and to transition. She said that she was thinking seriously of using the hormones and that she thought she probably would, and that at some point she wanted to transition, although she hadn't 100% decided on that. So one of the things I brought up with her is that your brain's not fully developed until you're about 25. And if you decide to do these things, it's going to be permanent. There's no way back. You'll be sterile. You won't be out with children. You won't have a family. And we brought it up in a more of a peaceful light and medical standpoint to kind of put things into perspective for her. And I told her, just wait until you're 25 and you've been able to gain a little bit more experience. Your brain's all the way matured. And then if you decide to do it at that point, you can do that if that's what your decision is. But just realize that there's consequences and you can't ever take it back.
We feel like we can reach her is by encouraging her to strengthen her mental health. And that gives me hope because research recently has come out. A Dr. Sherry Grossman was interviewed by Jordan Peterson recently, and she said that many of the symptoms of this rapid onset gender dysphoria will resolve if underlying mental illness is addressed and properly treated. And in the case of our child, she has depression, severe depression. She's oppositional defiant. She has anxiety. She has ADHD, and she has high functioning Asperger's. So there's a lot going on for her mentally. And if we can get those things addressed, I don't know. Hopefully I'm praying perhaps she may be one of those that Dr. Grossman talks about that has a resolution, an absolution of her gender dysphoria.
Well, I'm interested. I'm guessing that this is out among your friends in the ward and beyond. What has the response been on this? As far as other parents with your situation? Are they supportive of you? Are they supportive of her? What's the dynamic there?
So our ward doesn't really know to what depths we've been, primarily because our daughter knows these people. We don't want them to look at her and label her as someone who's so troubled, right? Like we want to get her the help that she needs. Now, they're probably going to find out to a certain degree because of this show. And honestly, I'm okay with it because I feel like we've gained enough experience and enough knowledge through our experience, as well as through reading and research, that now we can speak to this topic with some reflection and with some capacity to make sense of it. But when we were in the midst of it, when it was at the worst, our ward didn't know. My siblings know. They've been very prayerful for us. My sister-in-law, who's a big fan of yours, by the way, and who's the one who introduced me to your show, she, when I told her what was happening with Chandra, she immediately called me on the phone within 2 seconds of the text, crying, absolutely sobbing, because she used to babysit our daughter. And she used to take care of her when she was a baby while I was working full time and Ben was getting ready to go to med school. And so she's always felt very tied to our daughter. And she was just devastated to hear what's happened to her. And so my side of the family's been very prayerful. They support our perspective. I'll let Ben speak to his side.
Excuse me. My family's been rather quiet on the topic. They do use her pronouns and they use her new name, and they haven't really talked much about it. My family's kind of gone through a thing recently. We used to be very open and we used to talk to each other a lot about things, but I think honestly, with some of the new ideologies that have crept up in society, we have some of my family go one way and some go the other, and so we just kind of stay off the hot topiks.
Yeah, and that division really came about more or less with COVID. It just was interesting to see kind of the split come in right around the time with quarantine and COVID.
So looking back on all of this, what would you recommend to a parent who is just now beginning perhaps to go through this, or someone who maybe hasn't been quite attuned enough to realize that their teenager is perhaps has been grabbed by some of these ideologies? What would you recommend to them?
Well, the first thing that popped into my mind is to read the proclamation on the family. That was the very first thing that popped into my head. Then the next thing, read your patriarchal blessing and what it talks about, what your responsibilities and what the Lord sees in you as a parent, what sort of influence you're supposed to have on your child. And then I would say stick with the covenants. If you want the best possible outcome for your child to get through this, is if they know that you are sticking with the covenants. It doesn't mean that you're rejecting your child by not saying their pronouns or their new name. What I've done personally to kind of come to a sweet spot with our oldest is I call her by her name, which I've, state to her, her given name, not her new name. And whenever I want to refer to her, instead of using her pronouns, I just use her name, her given name. And that seems to be something that she's made her peace with, because I've prayed about it. God has told me to not give on this particular part, to not give in to the pronouns and to not give in to the new name, to hold firm in that line, but to do so lovingly and to always express love to my daughter and to always let her know how special she is to me. And so that's what I would say to start off with. And then read the book, Irreversible Damage, like we've mentioned. And then listen to interviews of Chloe Cole, who's a detransitioner. She's actually the same age as our daughter, ironically. But unfortunately, Chloe Cole's parents got caught up in the gender ideology, was immediately referred to a gender clinic at 13 and had a double mastectomy at 13 years old. And so any interviews of her, get educated. There's a movie called What is the Woman by Matt Walsh. It's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but he interviews a female to male transitioner who regrets what she did and talks about the physical effects of having taken all these hormones and gone through the transitioning process. Basically, in her words, she doesn't expect herself to live very long. She has so many health problems because of all of the cocktail of hormones and the procedures that she's had. Also, Jordan Peterson, his interview of Dr. Sherry Grossman. And then recently there was a whistleblower who came forward on a show called Trigonometry, a podcast, and it's an English, UK-based podcast. And this whistleblower herself is gay and is married to a transgender man, so a female to male. But she was a case manager, and she saw what was happening to these kids as a result of taking these hormones, including their mental health just going completely in the toilet, their physical health going in the toilet. And she started speaking out and saying, I think we're hurting these kids. And she, the doctors and everyone at the gender clinic said to her, just get on board or leave. Get on board or leave. So that's kind of this ideology. There is no room for disagreement or for any type of like debate. And so you can't, the drumbeat is, if you do not affirm your child, they're going to commit suicide. Well, that's basically what happened at this conference. Mm-hmm. That's what the therapist said to us parents. That's wrong.
That's mentioned all the time. That's like the big wall, because how do you respond to that?
Yeah. Right.
When you go that far, how do you respond to that? And so that's what seems to be brought up constantly. If I don't do this, they're going to commit suicide. If you don't affirm them, they're going to commit suicide.
And that's basically what we went through as well with her cutting and some of her mental health issues. I would say be very careful with your internet access for children. We were young parents and we were just coming into this new age with iPhones and iPads being available. And
she's our oldest.
She's our oldest. And we don't allow our younger two, even our 16-year-old, we don't allow them to have an iPhone. We don't allow them to just browse and peruse on the internet. It's have to be so controlled. Careful. Yes, we have that very tightly controlled.
Well, even beyond the gender ideology, and it's the mental health of teenagers, especially of girls. All of the studies are out. It's very, very clear that social media brings mental health way, way down. Right? It's a sickness. It's a virus that affects teenagers, especially girls, even beyond the gender ideology. My kids are all grown up, but just everything that I've read numerous studies on this. You can read Jonathan Haidt on this as well. I would be very black and white on this. I would not let my teenagers have an iPhone. I just wouldn't do it.
Yeah. Right. And our younger kids are not getting it. So yeah, that's something I'd be very careful with, is the internet access. And then we've recently come across some information from the Arbinger Institute as well, and how to handle the conflict. And we had a lot of conflict with our oldest, and our second kind of got wrapped up in that as well. And so we've had to try to really figure out a way to reconnect with them, despite our differences, and try to work through those at more of a fundamental level on our relationship. And so through the Arbinger Institute, we're figuring out ways to try to get out of what they call collusion, which is where you kind of get pitted against each other, and each person tries to feel justified. Mm-hmm. And the more you fan the flames, the more you give into the desire to be justified and to argue, the more justification you bring to the other person to keep arguing. And so by removing some of that resistance and by focusing more on the relationship rather than yelling and trying to coerce or try to get them to do what you want to do.
Like, don't bash in their Chromebook.
Yeah, exactly. So, the things we're learning now. And so if you can take away that resistance, and it allows them to kind of think through it more. If you can show them unconditional love, then that's the best hope we have, to allow something to prick their heart and to say, maybe I'm not going down the right way.
And unconditional love doesn't mean no boundaries. It means having boundaries, but putting those boundaries into place without any antagonism or or without having what they call a heart at war. So if you can feel good about your boundaries, feel good about what you feel is best for your child, do it. And don't feel bad about it. Don't feel shame. Don't place blame. Your child may not like it, but if you can do it with a heart at peace, it's going to be an easier pill to swallow for your child, and also something that will get them to actually step back and think, is this actually what's best for me? We've learned a lot about agency and, Heavenly Father's plan as far as agency goes as well that way. Because if we take away, if we try to, we as parents, we can implement these controls with the filters. We have a right to do that. That's our home. We have our values. We have what we feel is best for our children. We have a right to do that. But control being like manipulation, don't want to manipulate our children into listening to us or being obedient, or manipulate them to change their minds on a particular subject. We're learning we need to be inquisitive and ask a lot of questions. That's something that I have not been very good at as a parent, obviously, because we got so caught off guard by what happened with our oldest. If we had been inquisitive and started asking questions in a non-confrontational way, we would have been able to uncover this much sooner, possibly been able to place an intervention when she was much younger, and it could have changed the course of everything that came afterwards.
Right. So having a real solid connection with your child is so important. Then also realize that they're going to hear non-binary stuff. There's no way out of it. At this point, it's all over the schools, every school you go to.
If they're in public school,
especially public school. And I think probably private schools as well. I just imagine it's so enmeshed out there that there's no way to get around it. They're going to be confronted with it at some point, and I would just be prepared for that.
So we have a lot of conversations with our kids who are younger. Like we openly talk to them, ask them questions. We let them know they can come to us about anything that they're not sure about or they're confused about. We want them to feel like they can come to us for any reason without shame or embarrassment.
Well, Ben and Tami, really appreciate you coming on and going through this. I know this is a hard thing and you guys are going through such a difficult time. I mean, there's nothing more difficult than working through an issue like this with your child. You just love so much, and the adversity here is just so intense and so difficult to work through. But really appreciate you coming on and doing this. I think it's going to help a lot of people. They will hear the story. Many I know are going through the same. I get these messages from parents. I know that they go through the same thing, and a lot of people don't know what to do. And, we're in a time where technology has changed our culture and it's changed our know-how, right? We don't know how to handle all of these things because it's this onset of technology and information, and the access that others have to our kids has increased so much that we're not really aware of what really can be going on behind the screen, so to speak. So really appreciate you doing this and coming out with this so that parents can, either those that are going through it now can understand things a little bit better, and so that others can be warned of what can happen very, very quickly with their kids. Is there anything else you wanted to share with us about your story before we end?
Well, I think kids want to just feel like they belong. And so there's this drumbeat kind of go along with what you were saying, Greg, of being influenced, right? And so they, for whatever reason, the pride flag draws children in who do tend to struggle with social interactions. And so if your child has a tendency to struggle socially, be very vigilant. That's all I would say. I can't say exactly how to do this because I have obviously not done a good job of this with our oldest. But I would say just focus on their identity as a child of God and how special they are to their heavenly parents and what they mean to their heavenly father and heavenly mother.
And to their earthly parents as well.
Yes.
Of course.
I think that another thing that I've learned through this experience is that the way our bond is with our child it informs their relationship with God. But I also want to say that I have a lot of hope still, even though she's still in this and she hasn't really changed her mind much on it. There are some glimmers of hope for us. And I feel like, that the Savior is the Savior, that he has the power to deliver, and we trust in him, and we feel like everything's going to work out okay. We've prayed about this a lot. And when we pray, we feel peace. So I don't know when it's going to happen or how it's going to happen, but we feel like things are going to work out. And we feel like this is one of those experiences in life where, going through it, it's a humbling experience. But if we pass through it and we're trusting in God, looking for what he wants to teach us, that eventually we'll be able to ascend through it and things will be better on the other end.
Well, appreciate your faithfulness and your message and sharing your story. Again, I think that this is imperative that people can hear this and understand this. For again, so many that just don't have a grasp of what is really happening out there. You need to be vigilant. You need to understand what your kids are saying and who they're talking to. A lot of ideas out there, a lot of really bad ideas out there. And it's very easy for kids that need to belong to find these ideas. So thank you, Ben and Tami. Really appreciate it. Maybe we'll talk again.
Thanks,
All right,
Greg.
Thanks, Greg. See ya.
All right. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. I know it's hard to do. And I think it's a gift, though. That's a gift I think you're going to give to people.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. If they want to reach out, I think it feels like oftentimes so isolating to be in this situation. And so if any parents need someone to talk to, we would be happy to be available for them.
Great. If I get those messages back, I will forward them.